Welcome back to your Chem 4 lecture. We're wrapping up the final section of chapter 15 on lipids now by talking about cell membranes. So cell membranes are kind of what keep the cellular matter inside of a cell. And they're made out of lipids. So that's what we want to talk about now. So, one question out there all the time, you think about it your whole life is like, what is life, right? And if you want like a boring answer, you look to your chemistry class and ask yourself, hey, what is it that makes up life in biochemistry? Well, the way you can think about it is, life and life is basically a series of biochemical reactions that work to reproduce the chemistry of the body and also do a lot of chemistry that is involved in that, both protecting the reproduction of that material and that information and growing and making it bigger. And it's basically a strategy for keeping that biochemical process going over and over again. Now, there's a lot of complications, obviously. That's a very simplified way of stating it. But one of the big problems, if you're thinking about, doing chemistry over and over again, is that you got this problem, which is you need to keep all the ingredients in the chemistry in the same spot. And that's where the cell membrane comes in. The cell membrane is basically what separates the interior of the cell from the exterior of the cell. So we keep cellular processes on the inside. These are the things that require a lot of proteins and all that. And then non-cellular processes outside. So those are things like, oxygen transport, et cetera, going through the blood. So this is a way of separating our, living chemical processes from the non-living kind of physical portions of the world. And the reason that we talk about it in this chapter is that cell membranes are a lipid bilayer. And what it is basically is it's two rows of phospholipids. So remember your phospholipids, the glycerophospholipids, have two nonpolar fatty acids. Those form the tails, and then the heads are the phosphate and the amino alcohol, which we call the polar heads. So it roughly looks like this. So the polar heads all arrange themselves at the top, and they each have their tails sticking down. We call it a phospholipid bilayer because we have one layer up here, and then the other layer is kind of mirrored down here. And again, the nonpolar tails are sticking together. The polar heads are basically presenting tops and bottom. The top being, exposed to the outer surface or the outside of the cell, and the bottom being exposed on the inside of the cell. Again, this allows for water to both be on both sides, and water being kind of the main solvent for our biochemical processes. That's obviously going to be there, but crucially containing the cellular processes on the inside and separating it from the outside. So yeah, that's why we call this the cell membranes, because we have this bilayer here. Now on the inside, there's a hydrophobic region. That just means non-polar. And then on the top, that's the hydrophilic region. That is the polar area. You can have cholesterol sticking through. You have other proteins that stick all the way through. And then on the outside, you have these signaling carbohydrates that stick from the top of your phospholipids. So yeah, the lipid bilayer is complicated. It's not just the phospholipids that make it up. There's proteins involved, carbohydrates are involved for signaling in particular, cholesterol is involved for structural support. You have unsaturated fatty acids. That is what allows for cell membranes to be somewhat fluid rather than being rigid units that are all stuck together perfectly. And the proteins and carbohydrates on the surface, those are there for signaling and communication, as well as allowing for transport of materials inside and outside of the cell. Now, as far as transport goes, we have three different types of transport. We have diffusion. This is what's called passive transport. That's where particles can move from a higher to a lower concentration. And you don't want that always to happen, because if that always happened, your cell wouldn't actually contain any of your important materials. So your cell wouldn't be doing the functions of a living cell. Facilitated transport is basically like the opening up of a channel in the cell membrane that allows for fast diffusion of various whatever you happen to be interested in allowing to diffuse across a gradient. For example, there can be facilitated transport of protons, which we'll talk about in the very last chapter. And then finally, we have active transport, which requires energy, and it moves ions across a concentration gradient. So it moves them from low concentration to high concentration. And again, that requires energy to actually do that. So these are the three different types of transport, and you'll need to be able to recognize each of these three as we talk about it. Basically, diffusion would be like a small nonpolar molecule. So water, for example, can diffuse across the cell membrane. Even though it's polar, it's small enough that it can fit through. Then you have these facilitated transport channels. That's for something that's too big or too highly charged. So it needs something that can allow it to cut through. Active transport, that's where you want something to move to the outside or want to move something to the inside, and you want to keep it inside or keep it outside rather than letting it diffuse. Okay, so that covers our discussion of cell membranes for now. We'll have a better discussion of it in chapter 18 because it's important for some metabolic processes. But until then, let's go ahead and wrap up with just a simple multiple choice question here. The transport of particles across the cell membrane from a high concentration to a low concentration is called, and you have your three opportunities here. There's facilitated transport, diffusion, or active transport. Which of those does that match? Go ahead, pause, and let's go ahead and give it a shot. That is, of course, diffusion, where it goes from high concentration to low concentration. Active transport, that requires energy, and it's pushing the opposite way from low concentration to high concentration. Okay, well, that does it for chapter 15. I know that's a really small lecture here on cell membranes, but it's important to set the stage for what we're going to talk about in a later chapter. Until then, I'll talk to you soon. Make sure to ask away in the comments if you have any questions. And until then, I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.